Mayor Faulkner draws praise for a budget that restores cuts to rec centers, public safety, neighborhood services, code enforcement, and much more. After protests and media exposure, federal agents in Mexico raid squalid labor camps in Baja California, rescuing hundreds of workers, many of them children. And suicides continue at an alarming rate in San Diego County jails as a family's lawsuit claims the sheriff isn't doing nearly enough to prevent them. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, our reporter David Garrick of UT San Diego. Hi, Dave.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Good to see you back. And reporter Richard Morosi with the Los Angeles Times. Good to see you back, Rich.
Good to be here, Mark. Thanks.
And freelance reporter Kelly Davis. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, Mark. Good to see you.
How are we doing today?
Good.
All right. It is kumbaya time at City Hall as Mayor Kevin Faulkner is praised for his budget proposal this week. Democratic Councilman Todd Gloria says the Republican mayor's budget plan is, quote, a great start. Fellow Democrat Myrtle Cole praises Faulkner for aiding neighborhoods south of I-8. Quite the contrast to the political warfare waged in Washington. Let's listen to the mayor as he talks about how he wants to spend money next year.
Smoother sidewalks and better lit neighborhoods. More police officers protecting our communities, improved fire and emergency response times, and expansion of our successful after-school program. More internships and career opportunities for our young people. A tripling of internet speeds at every single branch library. More code enforcement officers to protect against slumlords and keeping all communities clean and safe.
Wow, smooth sidewalks and all the rest. What's this all going to cost? How much money are we talking about here?
Well, the budget is $1.3 billion. It's an increase of about $73 million over last year, but doesn't really cost taxpayers anything, you could argue, because sales tax, property tax, and hotel taxes are surging.
And so, yeah, as you're saying, so he's got a lot more money to work with this year. Quite a contrast from recent years, as we've seen. Huh?
The economy continues to a slow and steady recovery, but the numbers are even higher than they were before the recession in most cases.
Yeah. So let's talk about the nitty-gritty here. What does this budget do to restore some of these cuts from the lean years that we're talking about?
Well, I would say recreation centers is probably the star of the show. Last year, libraries got a lot of hours restored, and rec centers, which are the heart of a community in a lot of communities, have been slashed dramatically, and now they're going to be partially restored at sort of the most populous and central locations of rec centers.
Okay, so more time, more hours open, more folks working with people,
which
and
means
kids.
More programming, more tutoring, more senior events.
Okay. And now where else does the budget expand? What else will get beefed up here as we go along?
Most of it, I would say, would be you call infrastructure. Sidewalks, parks are getting maintenance, playground equipment, kind of stuff that the city neglected during the lean years because it's better than laying off firefighters and closing libraries.
Right.
You stop doing maintenance on things, and now that they have money, they're actually, they would call it a responsible move.
Okay. And the mayor is also proposing, we should say again, reiterate, this is a proposal. It goes through a whole...
A lot of negotiation between now and June.
We'll get to that in a minute, how that sausage is going to be made. And it is for fiscal year 2016, so that's coming up starting in July 1st.
July 1st,
yeah.
correct.
So how many workers does the mayor want to add in this? That's kind of one of the tricky things.
It's a few hundred, and there's definitely some concern that they won't be able to do that. I mean, the city had a pay freeze. They've had no pensionable pay increases, which makes jobs less attractive to folks. And a lot of workers took a 10% voluntary pay cut in 2010. You add all that up, and it's hard to find folks to fill these jobs. So a labor union leader said that while the budget may sound good, he's worried that maybe these jobs won't get filled.
So I mean, it's not hard times anymore. They've got to compete, obviously, with the private sector. There's some more attractive jobs out there. Not the once great myth of the cushy job at City Hall now anymore.
And other municipal jobs in other cities still get a pension instead of a 401k, and some of them didn't take pay cuts. So if you're comparing and you're choosing whether to work for one city versus another, San Diego might have a leg down.
Yeah, but it was roundly praised. I mean, a lot of folks, as we noted at the Open, did have some praise there, and I did want to refer to Michael Tsukete. He was very cautious in his praise. Who's he, and why is he a concern?
He was the labor leader I referred to. He's head of the Municipal Employees Association. He represents a lot of workers who've sort of taken the hardest hit. Police and firefighters tend to get treated a little bit differently than your ordinary rank-and-file employee. The ordinary employees took a lot of pay cuts, voluntary pay cuts, and they haven't really seen those restored. And some feel like maybe it's time for that to happen, and instead the mayor focused more on neighborhood services.
Okay. One thing I wanted to ask about was this budget. It really only tells part of the story. What is overall city spending when you factor in other things like sewer and water, capital improvements, things they're committed to?
Over $3 billion, But that's the thing with sewer and water is just the ratepayers cover that, so it's something where it's equal.
Mm-hmm. And of course, would that other part of the budget also include retiring debt on Petco Park and other ongoing bond things, long-time capital
Correct.
projects?
Yes, and the capital improvement budget is something that's gotten a lot more attention in recent years because of the city's infrastructure backlog. A lot of San Diego buildings and roads and bridges are crumbling, and so the city's been spending more and more on capital improvement, especially because they spent so little during the lean years.
Mm-hmm. And so we would hope that in coming years that would improve things for us. I think we can all see some teeth-rattling streets as we drive along and things that we would hope would improve.
I would have to say, though, critics say that this is maybe just putting your finger in a dam, and that the problem is larger than that, and the city's probably going to need to put a bond on the ballot, a mega bond, some have called it, and to try to increase taxation in order to pay for the infrastructure backlog because it is just so extreme.
It's been neglected for so long. The mayor also beefs up code compliance. What's been the problem there, and why is he focusing on that?
In his budget, there's really two things he's focused on. It's slumlords and medical marijuana dispensaries, the illegal ones.
Okay.
And
there's still several dozen of those operating in the weeds out there.
Some people count 50, some people say 26.
Yeah.
It's like playing whack-a-mole. They say you close one and they open up across the street or in a different location. So they've struggled with that, and they've also struggled with landlords who appear to be regularly neglecting their properties in certain neighborhoods. I think City Heights and Barrio Logan are the two that are most often mentioned. And these are slumlords who have a consistent track record, and the city didn't really have a proactive way to figure out who they were and how to attack them. And these new employees that they plan to hire will be assigned to do that.
Okay. We all live in the city here, Rich. I mean, you're looking forward to smoother streets and more rec time?
Yeah, one of the things I hear from a lot of residents is going to the parks and going to the bathrooms and they're closed, right? I mean, these are prominent areas, big parks, heavily used. You think, you said it's going to improve the recreations budget, so assuming we're going to have more open bathrooms in the middle of the day.
Maintenance for many different bathrooms is included in there. I assume that some of those are closed and the maintenance will allow them to reopen. It's referred to in the budget as maintenance and upgrades and repairs, but I don't know if those are ones that are open that'll just be better or whether they'll go from closed to open.
And this improving economic picture, do you think it's going to play any role in the whole charger pitch situation?
It's possible that the Chargers could point to that. Unfortunately, they're competing against other cities, and the economy is pretty much doing well everywhere, so I don't know how much of a deciding factor that would be.
And we should point out this budget really isn't going to specifically address or affect the charger thing. Whatever monies, public monies, would be a whole separate deal.
Completely separate and be subject to a public vote as far as everything we know.
Right. Now, the mayor ran on a promise to shore up the police department. We've talked a lot on this show. We've had a lot of stories in the San Diego media about cops moving to other departments for better paying jobs, better benefits and all. How's it going to affect that?
There's good news and bad news on that. One thing that's kind of the star of the budget that gets lost because it was announced 2 months ago is that the city's giving large compensation increases to police officers to increase recruitment and retention rates, which have been a real problem. Only cost $11.1 million this year, so it's not that much of an increase. But the way that those raises were structured, they're going to hit the budget a lot harder in years 2, 3, 4, and 5. So next year we may be talking about how, well, we can't afford this, that, and the other because the police raises cost $45 million. Right. So in a couple of years you're going to see a little bit more. It's not going to be huge, but it's going to be significantly more than it is now.
Okay, and that hit is coming down the line. Okay, short time left on this segment. Let's talk a little bit about that process. What happens now? We got the May and June revise, and we go from there. Huh?
Right. Well, starting May 4th, the City Council is going to go line by line through every department budget, and it's an excruciating process. One, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and then they'll make some proposals. The mayor will come up with a May revise with better revenue numbers, because some of this stuff is based on revenue numbers from March 1st. And then they'll haggle, and it'll go back and forth, and hopefully they'll adopt it, and the mayor won't veto it, and it'll be ready to go.
And it's got to be balanced. That's what the city charter calls for. All right, we'll be looking for those stories if we move forward in this process. Well, federal agents in Mexico have raided at least 3 squalid farm labor camps, 2 of them in Baja California, rescuing hundreds of workers and many of them children. The government isn't saying what prompted the raids in recent weeks, but news reports and worker protests over terrible pay, working and living conditions in some of these camps may have triggered the raids. Rich, tell us where the raids took place and what role did videos play here?
Yeah, the raids took place Baja California Sur, about 800 miles south of here, and the western state of Colima. They were raids on these makeshift little camps where hundreds of people were living. Not sure if they were connected to export markets, but one way of looking at it is that the federal government, the Secretary of Labor, is taking more serious in addressing labor abuses in at the nation's farms. And that's after a lot of more attention's being paid. I did a series in December. There's been a lot of attention in the Mexican media. And the recent strike down here in San Quintin, about 200 miles south of here.
Right, and I want to get to that in a second. Your excellent series, Product of Mexico, in December, of course, did shine quite a light on this entire situation. What were some of the worst practices and situations you discovered back then?
What happens is the big growers down there, and they're linked to the biggest retailers in the United States, they have to control their labor force, and they do this by withholding wages. And many times you'll be there on a 3-month contract. They won't pay you until the end. So, and you're in a fenced labor camp, and you basically, your movements are very severely restricted. Even if you want to leave, you don't have any money. Sometimes these camps are squalid, they're rat infested, they sleep on the floors, there's no beds provided, and you know, it's pretty much common knowledge that farm workers don't live good lives. But what's interesting about this is these camps are working for farms that supply major retailers in the United States who have strict codes of conduct for their suppliers, that have to treat their workers well. They have to comply with labor laws, and it's pretty evident that they're not.
And as I say, that series shined the light on that, and that put some pressure. What was the impact here in these major stores here and their relationship with?
Well, in February, the Mexican government, along with the produce industry, formed a social responsibility alliance. They handle about 90% of the exports to the United States, and they pledged to improve the lives of more than 1 million farm workers in Mexico. Walmart separately also said that they're going to step up their enforcement of their code of conduct for their supplier farms. Remains to be seen if they're going to follow through on these actions, which I publicized and others publicized. So we do have them on the record committing to do these things.
Okay, and these are major companies, as we note, who...
You know, if you eat a tomato in the United States, it's likely coming from Mexico. 50% of the tomatoes we get now come from Mexico.
Yeah.
Well, if you're an ordinary person and you want to try to help these farm workers get better conditions and put an end to this, can you go on the internet and figure out what store to go to and what store to boycott?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, and a lot of the customers, what I can tell them is groups in the past who have done this, they pose questions to the retailers. They ask them about their ethical sourcing practices, how they make suppliers comply with these policies, if they do audits. There are, after this strike here down in Baja, some groups are forming to organize boycotts or threatening boycotts against certain retailers or certain brands down there. But there's no real direct way of doing it. What it does is just raise consumer awareness, and with raised consumer awareness, they can sometimes pressure the retailers to start enforcing their guidelines.
Now, tell us about this strike of farm workers down in San Quintin. What action did they take, and what were they trying to get done?
San Quintin is a valley about 200 miles south of here. There's about 90,000 people live there. About a third are farm workers, and they pick berries and tomatoes and cucumbers, and especially this time of year, a lot of our berries come from down there and in the winter time. And for years, they haven't had wage increases. For years, they've been systematically denying their government-required benefits. And they gave an ultimatum in October to the government and the growers, hey, we want these demands met. Nothing happened, so they took over the region, basically, in early March. They closed down the road. They took over government buildings. Some of them were police stations, and it got pretty violent. Nobody died, but...
and the timing was a harvest time for some crops?
It was harvest time. Yeah. They timed it for the peak harvest period for the berries. So it took a force of more than 1,000 military and Mexican police to, using rubber bullets and tear gas to quell the riot. It basically reached riot proportions. Since then, they went to the negotiating table. They got the growers to concede the 15% wage increase, which they rejected. Most people have gone back to work, but under protest, they're still not happy. The farm worker leaders are in Mexico City as we speak right now, trying to meet with someone President Enrique Peña Nieto's administration.
Okay. Let's talk about some of these workers here, some of the indigenous folks. Who are they, and why are they relatively easy to exploit in some of these situations?
Yeah, these folks, for years, they come mostly from southern Mexico, Oaxaca, Guerrero. They're indigenous people, Mixtecos, Triquis. And for years, for decades actually, they would follow the harvest from San Quintin up the coast, North San Diego County, Santa Maria, and sometimes Oregon and Washington. What happened about 10 years ago with the more border enforcement, these folks can't migrate like they used to and follow the seasonal harvest, so they're stuck down in there. But this big population of farm workers has had a taste of what it's like in the United States, where there's more farm worker protections, there are unions, and some of these leaders that have emerged have experience in farm worker unions in the United States. So they have better expectations, sometimes better training in handling these things, so they're making more demands now. So it's kind of interesting, because I don't think this strike could have happened any other place aside from here, because of its relation and its proximity to the border.
Okay. Now, your story this past week noted that federal inspectors had not acted in the past, and there was one notable previous crackdown, but it was by state officers in Jalisco, right? Yeah. And so, why have the feds? Why are they acting now? And what's taking them so long?
You know, I asked them, and they say it's part of a bigger program to improve the lives of Mexican workers in general. But if you talk to the academics and human rights folks, they think it's just a direct response to heightened scrutiny of the lives of farm workers in Mexico. In part, it goes hand in hand with Mexico's booming export market. I think it was inevitable that this would come under scrutiny, because their export market has tripled in the past few years to $7–8 billion. It's a big part of their economy now. So part of the success, after success comes scrutiny of living conditions, because it is generating billions of dollars for Mexican agribusinesses and U.S. retailers.
In the bottom line, if we do get raises in wages there, working conditions and all, would we see an impact on the prices here and the business here? And
you know, there haven't been too many studies done on that. One professor did look at it. Bottom line, it would maybe boost prices for the average American family 40–50 cents a year. You know, not that much. Right. These folks don't earn a lot. Right. They're not asking for a lot, much more. $8 to $12 a day is what they earn. You know, the cost of food in Mexico is not that much cheaper than it is in the United States. Most of these folks live in little shacks patched together from, you know, rubber tires and wood. You know, a lot of them don't have water. A lot of them don't have electricity. So they're right now asking for 200 pesos minimum, which is about $15 or so a day.
A day. Oh.
They have big families. You know, they have to send their kids to school. In Mexico, you know, they don't provide the books and things for you. The families have to pay that, so that's a huge expense for these folks. Water is a huge expense, and food. So when you look at it from their perspective, they're not. You know, those $2, $3, $4 a day more makes a huge difference in their lives.
Right, a big difference. Really a human rights issue. All right, we'll look forward to more of your fine reporting. Thanks. Appreciate that. Well, we're going to move on. Christopher Nesmith was found dead in his jail cell at the Vista Jail on a March morning last year. The 21-year-old Marine hanged himself using a bed sheet attached to a ceiling light. He was one of 6 inmates who committed suicide in a San Diego County jail in 2014, and now his widow has filed a lawsuit against the county. Kelly, start by telling us what she's alleging. What are the points she's trying to make here?
She's alleging that jail staff should have known that Christopher was suicidal, that they had received notification, they had received warnings that he was a suicide risk, that he should be monitored more closely, and they did nothing to keep him from harming himself.
Right, and your story noted, of course, the method that he took his life was a bed sheet, and he had access to purchase razor blades as well. Yeah, I'm not sure about. I always thought that the razor blades in jail were safety blades, but it was something that concerned his wife. So okay. I don't know if he had brought it up to her. But. All right, and he was in the brig when he was a Marine. And how did the Marines handle this? He had his family described kind of a progression that seemed like surfacing mental illness, maybe PTSD. And the result of almost being shot in the head and some other kind of troubling experiences when he was overseas. Seeing combat overseas. Yeah, and so he acted out. He was put in the brig, and he tried to kill himself 3 times there.
But each time he was on 24-hour video surveillance, and so they saw what he was doing each time and got down to his cell and stopped him. At one point, they had to strip him of all his clothing for 2 weeks just to make sure he had absolutely nothing. I mean, that's how intent he was on ending his life.
And as a contrast to that, and according to this lawsuit that's been filed, what happened at the jail in terms of suicide watch?
Yeah, he would repeatedly tell his wife during visits and phone calls that he was going to kill himself. During visits, he'd make slashing motions at his neck. She said they were in full view of deputies. Their phone calls were monitored. And when he told his father that he was going to commit suicide, during a phone call, his dad immediately started calling his public defender, the deputy DA who's handling the case, sheriff's investigators, and they know for certain that at least the deputy DA made sure that the jail knew Chris was a suicide risk. But as far as the family knows, the sheriff didn't put him under suicide watch.
Now, what does the sheriff's department have to say about in response to this?
They couldn't comment specifically on this case because of the lawsuit. They insisted that their policy is that all suicide threats are taken seriously, and any inmate expressing suicidal ideations is immediately put under closer monitoring. They say they've changed some policies recently in response to some kind of high-profile suicides.
Because he wasn't the only one that committed suicide.
Yeah, six in 1 year is really high. In the story, I talk about LA County, which has a average daily jail population more than 3 times the size of San Diego. They had 5 suicides last year. Okay. San Diego had 6, so that's pretty significant.
In a system, yeah, as you say, is much bigger than ours. Now, how did there have been some changes, have there not, in the jail and protocol and how they deal with suicides and this risk? Yeah,
they have a new medical director. He came on January of 2014, if I'm remembering correctly. And they say that this past January, so January 2015, they have created what sounds like kind of an interim step between a safety cell where you've got constant monitoring, nothing to harm yourself. It sounds like they now have kind of a high observation unit or high observation cells to keep a closer eye on.
Training's improved, presumably, and they're trying to deal with
mental health workers.
Okay.
Does that strengthen the contention of the lawsuit, though? I mean, if someone files a lawsuit and you make a bunch of changes in your policy, isn't that saying your policy was flawed?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that comes to play in this lawsuit, because it did seem to me that they were admitting that they really needed to make some changes, especially after the 6 suicides in 2014.
And this story and the suicides has been just a part of your overall reporting on the relatively high number of deaths in county jails in recent years, right? And so those numbers overall for deaths for all purposes are fairly alarming.
Yeah, last year, so in 2013, when I was at San Diego City Beat, Dave Moss, a former reporter there, and I started looking at deaths in county jails, found that San Diego has a really high rate of deaths. And we were really shocked to see, after our stories came out, the deaths continued. And not only, well, I mean, yes, it's rare for a jail to have no death. A jail system as large as San Diego's to have no deaths, but the deaths... Because
these are at-risk populations in many regards.
And don't always take care of their health. But the deaths increased. 2013 was higher than 2012. 2014 higher than 2013.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Prop 47, which put a lot more prisoners from state prison into county jails, plays any role in this?
I've asked about that. The population has increased a little bit, but not too much. And I've looked closely at who these inmates are and would they have been in prison instead of jail. And no, these are all pretrial people. Well, not all, but for the most part pretrial.
Got it.
So they would have,
been there anyway.
Yeah.
Now, there have been several other lawsuits. Of course, we mentioned here, we're focusing on this one following the suicide last year. But lawsuits over deaths in general, what's the status of that? How many have there been, and what's happening with those?
That's a good question.
I know it's a broad question.
There have been quite a few filed. I think I know of 3 filed in 2014. There's the Nesmith lawsuit this year. There's another one that I know is in the works. And when Dave and I started reporting this when we started working on it in late 2012, we knew of one lawsuit at that time. So.
Okay, so and of course in our civil system it takes a long time for these to play out, and I'm sure you'll be keeping an eye on these. So it could be some time before we see a resolution of this particular lawsuit and some of these others as we go along here. All right, well that's it's terrific reporting. We will look forward to some more stories on this as we move ahead. Appreciate it. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, David Garrick of UT San Diego, Richard Morosi of the Los Angeles Times, and freelance reporter Kelly Davis. On a programming note, the Roundtable is standing down next week so that we can bring you a special broadcast from the USS Midway on the 40th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. The Roundtable reconvenes May 1st. Join us then and every Friday for our discussion of the week's top stories on the Roundtable. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.